With me today is Phnam Bagley, industrial designer, futurist, and aerospace architect, creating cutting-edge hardware and experiences in wearables, healthcare and wellness, education, robotics, transportation, and aerospace on and off planet Earth. Welcome, Phnam.
Thanks for having me, Ken. It's very nice to meet you.
So, what I hear from you and your firm nonfiction is that you take science fiction and you make it real. What does
Correct.
that mean?
Well, we are using our skills as designers. So the type of designers that we are specifically industrial designers. We design physical products, like think of everything that's physical around you, your phone, your laptop, your kitchen, your car. All of these things are designed by industrial designers. And so another field that we practice is space architecture, which is the design of space habitats that supports astronauts in those extreme environments. So taking these two fields, we essentially try to solve all the world's problems, right? From access to renewable energy in remote places all over the planet to human health and performance in and around the body, to figure out how we can keep not astronauts not only alive, but also thriving in an environment that's designed to kill them. So we specifically love working on things that have never been done before, right? Like that's love for futurism, love for a better future, and the belief that design has tools that allow us to think that way.
So I love that. Design provides us tools to allow us to think that way. Double click on that. Like, what way am I thinking as a designer that helps support your work?
You know, a lot of the world for a long time was designed by essentially, engineers and architects and sometimes scientists. And these people are very focused on the function of things, right? I need this object to do X, Y, Z. And then they start listing a product requirement list, and then, they find solution for it. But the human element is usually put on the back burner, right? The fact that people have certain behaviors, that sometimes humans are unpredictable, that we make, purchasing decisions a certain way that is not necessarily, what the theory
Mhm.
tells us. And so that human element is really what is driving the work of designers. We start with assumptions, and then we break down those assumptions and break it down to first principles, for example. Or we come up with new ideas through brainstorming sessions. We collaborate with other disciplines like science and technology and business to come up with these new novel ideas that we can down the line protect intellectually. So there are many, many tools that we use out there among ourselves. And when we work with companies, whether it's a startup or a big corporation, all the way to government design, that allow us to think outside the box and stop continuing to come up with the same ideas that end up with the same results.
So one of the ideas, look, you do a lot of work, from my understanding, in space and with
Mhm.
astronauts and the environment, as you said, that's designed to kill you. With lovely thought if you're going up to space. Um, but seriously, I was watching the video where you talk about food and a culinary experience in space, and what really moved me is one of the things that you did was understanding greens and
Yeah.
which worked in an area with no gravity, if you will, and
Mhm.
introduced it. So yeah, talk a little bit about that. I just thought, yeah, the whole area of culinary expertise in space was amazing.
Yes, absolutely. To back off a little bit from the idea of food in space. So when we think about space, we think about astronauts, we think about
Mhm.
propulsions, we think about rockets, we think about things like this. And all of these things are absolutely necessary for us to even begin to think about humans in space. But the big problem that we still haven't solved yet is how we're going to feed people going into deep space. Deep space meaning, beyond the moon. Let's say, let's go to
Hmm.
Mars. We have solutions for everything else, but the solutions for food are quite limited. And the reason for that is because today we rely on fresh food that is sent from Earth, and we rely on rehydrated, freeze-dried food. Like it can be meat, it can be full meals, it can be vegetables, it can be things like that. So you just add water to it, warm water or cold water. And then we also rely on ready to eat food. Like think of like the military package, open the
Right.
thing and there's a stew in it. So these are the three main ways you can eat food. And I don't know if you've ever eaten like this for an extended amount of time, but it's going to be very hard for people to stay healthy and motivated to keep their weight while they're doing that. And so by developing new ways of growing food in space, like the plants you were talking about, is going to bring some variety in types of food, in flavors, in textures, and we can perhaps integrate like a wider variety of culture in the types of food that we're offering these astronauts to not only help sustain their bodies, but also sustain their mental health, right? On Earth, we have many choices of everything. We're not limited by what we transport and was designed for us 7 years ago. We we come into life day by day, choosing what we desire, and that is something that is at this time not possible for astronauts. And food is one of those avenues that allow us to do that if we innovate enough in it. So aeroponic systems of growing food in space allow us to grow perhaps tomatoes or chilies, or down the line, if you watch the movie
Hmm.
or read the book The Martian, your potatoes. We're not there yet, but we'll get there eventually. Um, so that, not only brings variety of food, but also brings this green environment around the habitat, right? Because right now, if you look at the International Space Station, for example, which is like the kind of like the pinnacle of what we've sent up there, besides the Chinese space station, is pretty stark. It's very industrial, it's very
Hmm.
utilitarian, it's very functional, and it's wonderful. It's a wonderful lab, but it is a lab. A lab is not a place where you live, it's not a place where you thrive, it's not a place where you grow, emotionally. And so integrating these plants, these things that you grow, these things that you tend to, um, are going to help with the physical and mental health of these people.
Just to add to that, you also showed grilling food with lasers.
Yes. Um, so we realized that in a lot of cultures, including the United States, grilling proteins is a celebratory
Right.
event, right? We do that Christmas or Thanksgiving and other holidays. However, grilling with fire is not something that engineers at NASA, for example, would be very thrilled about, because it's an oxygen-rich environment, and we don't want the station to explode. So, by using lasers in a controlled environment, we can artificially create these grill marks that not only look appetizing but also taste pretty wonderful, and that would really elevate a lot of the food that is now available out there, because right now the food comes in plastic bags and they're rehydrated. They kind of like look like sad stew that's been like in that for like a year or so. It's uh, the appetizing aspect of foods is something that's is not a priority at this point, and I want it to become one.
Well, in one of your talks, you said that you've been told that your love language is food. So,
Yes.
and that pizza is what people get if you don't get along with them. Where does this food rank in your love language then? How close to can you get to an experience for astronauts?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many companies and startups and even NASA itself, developing new ways of growing food, more varieties of things that can grow in microgravity using aeroponics. There are companies, there's one called Solar Food in Finland, for example, that is creating protein essentially from the air and electricity by extracting water, oxygen, carbon, and electricity and putting them in a bioreactor and creating this base material called selene, and you can make ice cream out of it. You can make, like yogurt and different types of food. There are also talks of 3D printing different types of food in space, like fish or steak are being tested here on this Earth. And 3D printing in space is a little bit more complex. Um, but it also opens the door to new opportunities we cannot do on Earth. For example, you've probably heard of 3D printing organs, right? Which is
Yeah.
like the future of medicine. 3D printing organs is very difficult because on Earth is very difficult because the structure of the organ relies on scaffold while you're 3D printing,
Hmm.
and these can actually disturb the function of the organ itself. So if you 3D print in microgravity in space, for example, you can print without scaffold in
Right.
theory, and then
Right.
have these organs, be transplanted pretty easily from there. So yeah, so just coming back to food, there's so many innovation, and I think it comes back to the basics, like what do we desire to eat? We don't want to live in a world where we only eat artificial food or food that doesn't remind us of home or food that's is so divorced from the celebrations and the rhythms and the traditions that we have built over the whole of humanity. We want to bring all of that, right? Every time we talk to astronauts, whether they're from the Emirates or from the United States or from Europe, um, that's always the thing that they want. It's like, how can food remind them of home, and how can they bring flavors and textures and pleasure to their everyday life? Because living in this space environment is quite constraining, right? Like you're living with the same people in an
Right.
environment that's not particularly clean or comfortable, floating in microgravity. Every system in your body is traumatized. And so the little comfort of food can bring a lot to a mission.
So we've talked about bringing food to space, but you also talk about the constraints of space, and I'm wondering what we can repatriate back to Earth. What learnings can we take away?
Yeah, I mean, I just mentioned the printing or like 3D printing organs. There's so many industries that are looking to space for, where innovation is going to blossom. Like, for example, AI is very big right now, and it very much depends on computation, and computation depends on the quality and size of, chips and semiconductors. And my understanding, and I'm not a scientist, but my understanding is there's a limitation, physical limitation of growth of crystals of semiconductors on Earth's gravity. Like silicon crystals can grow up to like 6 inches in theory, and in practice a lot less. And the purity is not great for the same reason. So perhaps there's a way to grow these semiconductor crystals in microgravity on orbits at larger size and higher level of purity, and then bring them back to Earth to help continue that AI curve that's going up. So that's some research that's done at Stanford University. Dr. Debbie Sineski with her company Astro Materials is working on that, and I know that other groups are doing as well. So there's that. And also historically, there are many innovations that we use every day that we don't think come from space, right? Solar panels, water filtration systems were a necessity. Otherwise, because we don't have the luxury to bring all the water that we need and open the faucet at will just to take a
Hmm.
shower up there. So recycling water was so incredibly important. Wireless communication systems had to be developed in sophisticated ways for astronauts to communicate with Earth. Um, like insulin pumps were developed up there. So really everyday products that are so ubiquitous today comes from space. And now that the commercial space economy is in its infancy, we have more brains and more ideas and more potential coming to the table. And one thing, that I want a lot of people to understand is that at this point in history, um, making money in space is difficult, right? Like it takes so long and takes so many brains and
Mhm.
so much effort to send something to space. You're probably not going to make any return on investment quite yet. But if you apply sort of like a dual use like mindset to the innovation you bring out there. You innovate in space because the extreme environment of space forces you to go very far, but
Right.
then you adapt that technology to Earth in order to turn it into a viable business model. So that's really how this is going to work in I would say the next couple of decades.
Oh, very cool. Thank you for that. Let's stay on Earth now a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, Curious to learn more about the schools you've designed that support neurodiversity and lifelong learning.
Absolutely. So this was actually a project that happened before COVID, like 2017, 2018, 19. So we were reached out by this gentleman in Singapore who's working with the government there.
Mhm.
And Singapore, as many may know, ranks very well in education, right? I think at the time they were like number one in reading, math, and science. For a tiny country that's like not even 60 years old, that's pretty impressive. However, there's the type of education that's prominent there is quite traditional, very based on meritocracy. At age 12, you kind of like choose a path of education that you stay on until you start your professional career. So it's a lot of pressure on the children. It's a lot of pressure on the parents, on society, and there seems to be a development of like a mental health gap between where education is going and where that society is going. In Singapore, if you've ever been, it's like this beautiful, very futuristic place,
Mhm.
but it also, hides a lot of things under the carpet, right? Like, for PR reasons, I guess. But we really wanted to find a happy medium where we help this country continue flourishing, with all its openness to the rest of the world and love of innovation. But we also want to make sure that the children from a very young age are supported mentally, and that their neurodiversity, the way they learn is different, the way they communicate with each other is different, their relationship to language and culture is different for each of them. So how do we use technology and design innovation to help support with all of that? So yeah, I mean there are many things that we put in place, and really it came down to like five different pillars that we put in place to create this school. So number one is really thinking about practical psychology, mental health and happiness. How do we
Mhm.
define them and how do we offer them to the children? Carbon neutrality. You can't be a healthy individual living in an unhealthy place. So how
Right.
do we create a school that kind of exists as a living organism? An organism, absorbs certain nutrients, expels certain nutrients, and works together that way. So we designed a school to be that way. We also wanted to focus on growth of the intellect in the body. There
Mhm.
are many instances of synesthetic learning. How do we integrate different sensory experiences together? The auditory with the visual, with the textural, with the temperature and things like that to help with children getting the sense of an idea rather than just having to um, learn things by heart, like what we were forced to when we were kids. We wanted the school to also be hackable, right? Every aspect of the school, the physical, the digital, the experiential, the architectural is hackable because everybody comes in different forms and needs and
Mhm.
shapes. And so why can't I change the stool I'm going to be sitting on so it really fits my needs at that point in time? And then the last pillar has to do with connection, right? Singapore is a very small country. If they only do things within the limits of their countries and their culture, it's not going to help them connect with the rest of the world. So how do we create that borderless education? How do we export? How do we create exchanges with the way other schools are functioning? So we developed all of that, 5 pillars, and created an architecture that looked like a monster. And the idea of creating a school that looked like a monster was pretty cool because it's basically giving the agency to children to design the school where they would feel comfortable, they would feel motivated to learn, and to not have any limits in that learning.
So when you describe that, because I mean, there's a lot of fundamental differences from a traditional learning space. Are there any longitudinal studies on, where these students have gone, how they've grown, any impact on who they become?
Yeah, so the school was designed before COVID, and
Yeah.
we had created some like test environments with some
Mhm.
children in multiple places in Singapore, and they were very, very promising. However, COVID unfortunately
Okay.
killed the project. Um, and it's funny because the client wanted to reignite the project in the middle of COVID, but then they got enamored with the idea of AI and had moved that way. So I think there's still a lot of learning that is still relevant today, to other types of school systems that might be developing. So, anybody who's developing a new school system or new school types of architecture in different types of places all around the world can learn from that. And you can see a lot of
Sure.
that discovery on our website.
Sounds good.
Mhm.
So you also nonfiction, your firm, you also support the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And
Yes.
if you can just talk a little bit about those and then specifically about your trip to your work in Nigeria.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, I think that the 17 Sustainable Development Goals are a great framework for storytelling. Because a lot of people understand that we are creating a lot of stuff out there, but why are we creating it? For what purpose? And how is it advancing humanity or the way we take care of this planet? And so the 17 SDGs are like well branded enough that anybody um, who is involved at all in innovation and creation knows about them. And so really it's about what's important, in this world. Because for a long time I've designed a lot of, audio products and sports products and, luxury device the goods and things like that. And in the end, it's like, why are we doing this? Why are we creating more stuff? Like, who is it serving in the end? And so, tackling big problems like hunger or land conservation or human health and well-being or equity or education are pretty low-hanging fruit of like what we should do with our time and with our energy. So since we have put that in place at the company, we have decided to exclusively work with companies that align with those SDGs, right? So anybody who wants to do a product that just is here to make a dollar,
Mhm.
they can go to another design studio. But if they
Right.
want to change the world for the better, we want to work together. And so the example that you mentioned, the work we did in Nigeria is a fantastic example of that. So Nigeria is the richest country in the continent of Africa. They're very rich in oil and gas, and the technology that's being developed there, and people are wonderful. It's a very populated and young country. However, one of the basic things they don't have access to is reliable electricity. Right? I
Mhm.
was there for an entire month last year, and then we were staying in like the more elevated part of Lagos, for example, and the electricity would cut like about 7 times a day. For someone who's running a company like myself, being on Zoom every couple of hours, it was very disrupting, and I can only imagine how it's disrupting for people who live there. And so we work with this company called Jazza Energy, and basically they're based in Canada and Tanzania, and they're developing these basically solar huts that are popped in different villages all over the country, and they collect solar energy and then invert the power into these like small batteries that are then distributed to different villagers, families all over the country. So what's really, really cool about that project is that we were involved in designing the whole thing, the physical aspect, the huts and the inverters and then the batteries, and want to make sure that the way we designed them was appropriate with the environment, right? Because at first, when we start interviewing people in Nigeria, they're like, "Oh, I just want something that looks like, an Apple or a Nike or, all the big brands that they like." And we didn't feel like it was appropriate for them. Um, and also, not necessarily something they can afford, right? So we came to the drawing boards and wanted to develop the idea of the hive, the honeybees, the hive, the structure, the hexagonal structure, which is quite strong, universal, and beautiful. And so we came up with these little batteries and these architectural structures, and start installing them in April of last year.
Hmm.
And you could see immediately, people hovering around these structures. The people doing the operations, the batteries themselves are rented by the villagers. They're not bought. The main reason being they cannot afford buying them, right? And so the idea is to be able to rent a battery for very low cost and then swap them as many times as you need. These batteries are about 60 ampere hour, which allows
Mhm.
you to charge up about, four phones, maybe a little lamp, and maybe a little fan, right? That's enough for the type of lifestyle that they have in these
Right.
villages. And so the operations people working in those huts are 100% young women who have never had a job before. They are trained to do that work. They're trained to do customer service, um, to KPI and things like that. So
Mhm.
so it gives them skills to perhaps go on and having a professional career, or have more skills to use at home as well. Because until these huts came into their villages, their options in the future of their life after high school was pretty limited to marriage and children, which is fine. And one thing that's pretty interesting about this project is we really took that into account, right? We designed these huts for these women to work, to allow them to bring their children, their babies, to work, because we can't really force them to do things that don't align with their local
Right.
culture. So anyway, so it's a whole system that really covers many of the 17 SDGs, right? It covers, equity. It covers, like these women actually paid a significant amount of money compared to everybody else in the village, and so they become essentially village rich, and they have more agency about their own life. They have more power of decision in the village itself, and it's really slowly changing um, these communities for the better.
Well, I appreciate the story. I'll also say I'm sitting in Toronto, Canada, and
Mm.
to hear about the Canadian company, we've had a number of Canadian companies that have done miniature solar installations for Africa. We've processing of different types of food proteins, insect proteins, and whatnot. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's great to hear. Thank you
yeah.
for that. And so just before we go today, can you tell me a little bit about OSMED?
Yes. So OSMED is the Organization for Space Medicine, Engineering, and Design. And so it's an organization that was started in 2024 by very dear friends of mine. And they've actually asked me to become chair of design of that organization. What we do at OSMED is creating documents like white papers and decks and videos and content to help create a new foundation for the future of human spaceflight. Because for a long time, we have relied on engineers and scientists to design how to best send humans to space. And it's not necessarily taken into account all aspects of health. The reason for that is, the race to space forced us to pre-select essentially superhumans to go up there. And that tells us very, very little about what happens when something goes wrong in space. And
Mhm.
something will go wrong in space at some time. We better be prepared for it. And so that's why space doctors, flight surgeons, and other types of health specialists um, are essential to have in the mix. So that's for the space medicine part. The engineering part, nothing in space happens without engineers. We want to make sure that whatever we design is appropriate for to create, the environment, the pressure, access to water, access to air, functional systems, and rocketry that allows all this to happen. And then the last ingredient is design, which is the part that I lead. And design, as I said in the beginning of this interview, is about the human experience, right? How do we have the hardware system, the software system work in harmony with the human system? The
Right.
human system in terms of survival, in terms of living day to day and being efficient at work, because people are working up there, they're not just floating around. And then what happens to the future of humans in space, right? Like, how do we deal with big subjects like death or reproduction or, living for extended amount of times outside of the limitation of Earth? What does it mean to be an interplanetary species? The philosophy of it, the meaning of it all, right? So merging all of these disciplines together, space medicine, engineering, and design, and having them collaborate, having them find common language and have honest conversation about what it takes to make human spaceflight safer and more welcoming to a wider range of humans. We started with superhumans, which was necessary, and now we're slowly getting into the realm of space flight participants. So essentially, tourists who go up there for a few minutes or a few hours or a few days, and then eventually we'll have people like you and me go up there, and none of us have time to like train for 10 years and get multiple PhDs and become doctors of flight specialists to do that. So how can we do that with minimum amount of training while doing it safely and creating a stepping stone for more innovation for the future?
Thanks for sharing that, Phnam Bagley. Yeah, I think I'll leave the space adventure to you. I'm not sure that my back will go up there, even with minimal training.
Well, actually, the
It might be
back,
better up there, isn't
it might be better because there's
it?
no gravity and
Right.
pressure pushing
Okay.
against your spine. Yeah.
Okay, take that back. I'll go up before you. Um, anyway, thank you so much for joining us on Say Hi to the Future today.
Thank you so much for having me. That was a very fun conversation.